So I'm trying to sort of envision what it was like for you arriving to New York in your 20s and entering, forging these relationships with some of the greats of the Yiddish theater. Can you talk about it sort of from your perspective?
I certainly can. I came to New York to be an artist because that's, when I was 11 years old, I felt that that's what I was. And however that unfolded. And because I spoke Yiddish, because this was a passion that I had developed and followed through, and because I spoke it, in the beginning, not so great, I had access to these incredible personalities that, strangely, nobody else was interviewing, or very few people were interviewing. So I felt, just in the way that I knew that My Mother's Sabbath Days was an amazing book. When I was hanging around with Luba and Seymour, I felt like I was hanging around with Greta Garbo and Frank Sinatra. And so, but they were very different strains of theater. There was the musical theater and then there was the literary theater, so broadly. And so I had a master teacher in both. Now, if I'd gone to university, I could not have gotten that information. There was nowhere to study. I had taken the one Yiddish theater class that was offered anywhere in the world at the time. So I began studying with these two incredible people. And I had complete access to them and to their artistic life and how to build an artistic life and to their artistic knowledge because I spoke Yiddish. It was this weird portal. I had the passport because I spoke the language, and I had access to world-class people. The same thing happened in college. I studied with Elie Wiesel because I spoke Yiddish. I spoke to Saul Bellow in Yiddish. I spoke to Harold Bloom in Yiddish. People were interested people were open because I actually spoke the language, and they were interested into why I felt it was important to speak the language. So it was, in a way, the Yiddish theater or the Yiddish artistic experience is a metaphor for the artist's experience. Why did why did James Joyce make Leopold Bloom Jewish? To just hone in on the isolation and the loneliness and the separateness that is the artist's life. So I was trying to build, and of course one has very simple dreams when they're young. You're going to be a star. I was trying to build an artistic career for myself, and that was difficult. And I was noticing that not only was I seeing other great artists not getting recognized, but I was seeing a whole artistic tradition that was enormous, that was bigger than anything I'd ever played at. I was playing for 40 people a night. They were playing for 3,000 people a night, and nobody knew who they were. And nobody in the American theater knew who they were. My day job was writing a website on the Yiddish theater, and I would talk to all these theater people that I met, and I would talk again. I did the same thing, like, do you know Chaim Grada? I didn't say Chaim Grada. I'm like, do you know Maurice Schwartz? He had the longest running repertory company in Yiddish, in American history, in any language. And he, for over 30 years, longer than the group theater. Why are people talking about and it was a 3,000 seat theater. You can go see it. It's still there on 2nd Avenue and 12th Street. And everybody would be like, what are you talking about? Like, what? You don't know anything about the Yiddish theater? There were 12 Broadway-sized houses in New York alone. It was huge. And oh no, the Yiddish theater it was just some sort of vaudevillian Borscht Belt. I'm like, actually wasn't. And sometimes people would listen to me, and more often than not, they would glaze over. And I just couldn't understand how this was possible, and it made no sense to me. And I've seen things shift a lot in the 20 years, People understand the value of the Yiddish theater more. They still extract from it what serves themselves, right? And maybe cover up where they got it from. But they recognize its value more.
Why do you think this happened to Yiddish theater? I mean, why do you think people didn't know about it?
It happened to Yiddish too. It was the 6 million of its audience members were killed, and then there was the rise of Israel and the primacy of Hebrew as the language that was chosen. Seymour and Miriam were also in Yiddish films, and Seymour was in one of the first Yiddish talkies, I think the first Yiddish talkie. and it was screened in Israel, and there were riots and people were throwing rocks, and this was covered in the New York Times because how dare they show a movie in Yiddish. So then it became just associated with failure or not success, and then Broadway became, you wanted to assimilate. You wanted, for instance, take one of the most quintessential American playwrights of the later half of the 20th century is Arthur Miller, right? You think of him as American. Some people might be interested in his Jewish roots, but people don't necessarily think of his characters as Jewish characters, or people who aren't Jewish don't. And Joseph Bulow translated with Luba Death of a Salesman, Der Tod von der Voyageur, into Yiddish. And it was just in 1952, when it was still a new play, and Miller saw it, and Commentary magazine said he returned Arthur Miller's script to its Yiddish original. So just again, these roots, this secret language was there. It was the sauce, it was the depth, it was the struggle, it was the pain that people were trying to get into the English, and they were just either intentionally covering it up or just wanting to assimilate or to appeal to more people. And anti-Semitism, of course, plays a part in it. Why did so many Jewish actors feel the need to change their names? So it's just a very controversial thing. Or people who did make it on the other side wanted to just have their roots disappear, because it was painful, because so many people had suffered so tremendously because they spoke that language.